Let's now turn our attention to the movement of water. Before we do this, we need to delineate the various compartments of the body and the distribution of water therein. We mentioned previously that we're made up of approximately 30 to 40 trillion cells. Given this, it's not surprising that the largest volume of water is our intracellular fluid, which accounts for approximately 2/3 of our total body water. The cell membrane, which we already established, has constitutive properties, allows water to cross, but it restricts the movement of solutes. The extracellular compartment comprises 1/3 of our total body water. The extracellular compartment is further divided into plasma, which contains the water inside of blood vessels, and the interstitial fluid, the fluid outside of the blood vessels that occupies the spaces between cells. The breakdown of extracellular fluid is approximately 80% interstitial fluid and 20% plasma. This slide depicts the two major components of the extracellular fluid compartment, the plasma and interstitial fluid. Endothelial cells line the blood vessels and form the barrier between these two compartments. The luminal surface of the endothelial cells, which is facing the interior of blood vessels, is also covered by a carbohydrate-rich layer called the glycocalyx. This contributes to the vascular barrier and helps regulate the movement of fluid and solutes across it. Water and many solutes can move readily between the plasma and the interstitial fluid. They do so through clefts between the endothelial cells. So, the small solute compositions between plasma and interstitial fluid are quite similar. Large plasma proteins, however, are much more restricted, so plasma contains considerably more protein than the interstitial fluid. Here I highlight the relative concentration of these three important ions that will recur throughout the semester: sodium, potassium, and calcium. Now, as I give you these numbers, realize I'm not concerned that you memorize these exact concentrations. Instead, I want you to know their relative distributions. Sodium is more concentrated in extracellular fluid. Potassium is more concentrated in intracellular fluid. And calcium is more concentrated in extracellular fluid. The intracellular fluid compartment also contains large amounts of proteins and phosphate-containing organic molecules, such as ATP. Plasma contains proteins such as albumin, whereas the interstitial fluid normally contains considerably less protein. These differences in composition are important because they influence the movement of both solutes and water between these compartments. As we discussed in our first lecture, diffusion is the movement of a solute across a membrane down its concentration gradient. In this diagram, I've shown two compartments separated by a membrane. Initially, a solute is more concentrated on the left. We refer to this solute as a penetrating solute because it can cross through the membrane. I'll stipulate that this membrane is permeable both to the solute and to water. Movement will occur from left to right until equilibrium is reached. At this point, there are equal amounts of solute on either side, and no further net movement will occur. Note that as in this example, there's no net movement of water. Now let's change the situation. Suppose the membrane is permeable to water, but solute cannot cross. This type of solute is called non-penetrating solute because it cannot cross the membrane. Because the solute cannot simply diffuse across the membrane and eliminate its concentration difference, it can produce a sustained force that redistributes the water across the membrane. The resulting net movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane is called osmosis. This distinction is important. When we discuss diffusion, we're usually following the net movement of solute down its concentration gradient. But when we discuss osmosis, we're especially interested in the net movement of water. And the movement of water is produced by a difference in effective solute concentration across the membrane. Let's talk a little bit more about how water gets across the membrane. Water is highly polar, yet our cell membranes are quite permeable to it. A small amount of water can cross directly through this phospholipid bilayer. How easily this occurs depends partly on how tightly the phospholipids which make up our cell membrane are packed. Saturated fatty acid tails can pack relatively tightly, whereas cis unsaturated tails introduce bends that disrupt packing and increase membrane fluidity. This creates more transient free space within the bilayer and can lower the barrier to water moving through it. More importantly, many cells contain specialized transmembrane proteins called aquaporins. Aquaporins provide highly efficient pathways for water movement across the membrane and greatly increase membrane water permeability. Diffusion and osmosis are oftentimes confused. Let's sharpen the distinction between these two terms. Diffusion is the movement of solute driven by a concentration gradient of that solute. Osmosis is the net movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane driven by an osmotic gradient. A difference in solute concentration across the membrane creates a difference in osmotic pressure that drives water movement. Water moves toward the solution with a higher osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure is typically denoted by the pi sign. The relationship between solute concentration and osmotic pressure can be described by the Hoff equation. As with previous formulas, we will not be using this formula to calculate a precise number. The important conceptual point is that osmotic pressure increases as the concentration of osmotically active particles increase, and it also depends on absolute temperature. In its ideal form, the equation assumes that the membrane is impermeable to the solute. That assumption gives us a useful theoretical maximum for the osmotic effect of that solute. Our membrane, however, differs in permeability to different solutes. We describe this using the reflection coefficient represented by sigma. The reflection coefficient is a dimensionless parameter ranging from 0 to 1 and describes how effectively a membrane prevents a particular solute from crossing it. It indicates the fraction of the theoretical osmotic pressure. By including this in our Hoff equation, we will calculate the fraction of the theoretical osmotic pressure that a solute actually exerts across the membrane. A reflection coefficient of 1 means the solute is fully reflected or blocked by the membrane, and the actual osmotic pressure equals the theoretical osmotic pressure. A reflection coefficient of 0 means the solute passes freely across the membrane. Because solute can redistribute across the membrane, it cannot maintain an osmotic gradient across the membrane. A reflection coefficient of 0.5 yields an actual osmotic pressure that's about 50% of the theoretical osmotic pressure. So the important take-home principle is the less permeable a membrane is to a solute, the more effectively that solute can produce sustained osmotic water movement across that membrane. In this example, the solute has a reflection coefficient of 1. This results in a higher osmotic pressure on the left side compared to the right, which contains no solute. Water will tend to move to the left toward the higher osmotic pressure. If we applied sufficient external pressure to that compartment on the left with a piston, we could prevent the net movement of water. The magnitude of the applied pressure to prevent osmosis is what we call osmotic pressure of that solution. Another useful way to think about osmotic pressure is the tendency of a solution to draw water across a selectively permeable membrane. In other words, to drive osmosis. This brings us to two terms that are commonly confused: osmolarity and tonicity. Osmolarity describes the concentration of dissolved particles in a solution. A dissolved particle is an osmole, so the units we use to express osmolarity is milliosmoles per liter. We can then compare the osmolarities of two solutions. In this case, solution A and B have the same solute concentration of 285 milliosmoles per liter. Therefore, they are isoosmotic, with iso indicating that they're the same. In this example, we have a difference in solute concentration. Side A has a greater solute concentration than side C. In this case, we would refer to side A as hyperosmotic to side C, with hyper indicating greater than. Or, looked at it from the opposite perspective, we could say that side C is hypoosmotic with side A, with hypo indicating less than. So osmolarity itself is a property of a solution. Isoosmotic, hyperosmotic, and hypoosmotic describe how the osmolarities of two solutions compare. When using the term osmolarity correctly, we must acknowledge what it does and doesn't tell us. On this slide, all three setups show solutions with the total concentrations of dissolved particles initially the same. These solutions are all isoosmotic, but notice that we have provided the reflection coefficient for these particles. So we're showing a difference in membrane permeability between the green and the yellow particle. On the left, we have the same concentration of identical particles on either side of the membrane. The solute is freely penetrating. Because it can redistribute across the membrane, it cannot maintain a significant osmotic pressure difference across the membrane. Therefore, there will be no net movement of water. On the far right, we have identical concentrations of non-penetrating solute on either side of the membrane. These particles have a reflection coefficient of 0. But because they have the same number of particles on either side, the osmotic pressures are balanced. Therefore, there will be no net movement of water. The central frame is different. We have two different types of particles on either side of the membrane. The solute on the left has a higher osmotic pressure because the reflection coefficient of the yellow solute is 1. The green solute, which has a reflection coefficient of 0, diffuses across the membrane. It does not change the osmotic pressure in this case because its reflection coefficient is 0. In this case, water will tend to move to the side with the higher osmotic pressure. So as this slide demonstrates, two solutions can be isoosmotic without being equivalent in their effects on water movement. This observation leads us to the concept of tonicity. So osmolarity is a measurable concentration of dissolved particles in a solution. We mentioned that we express osmolarity in milliosmoles per liter. Tonicity is a functional concept that we describe qualitatively as hypo, iso, or hyper based on its effect on cell size. Tonicity is determined by the effective osmolarity of the extracellular fluid. By that, we mean the contribution of solutes capable of maintaining an osmotic pressure gradient across the membrane. The greater a solute's reflection coefficient, the greater its contribution to that effective osmotic pressure. By comparing the effective osmolarity outside of the cell with that inside the cell, we can predict the direction of water movement and therefore its effect on cell size. Here I've drawn a cell with an osmolarity of 285 milliosmoles per liter. This is our standard cell, and this will be our baseline throughout the rest of the semester for our normal osmolarity. The osmolarity results from molecules with a reflection coefficient of greater than 0. Imagine placing a cell in a solution with an effective osmolarity of 285 milliosmoles. Both solutions have the same osmotic pressure. As a result, there will be no net movement of water. This type of solution is referred to as an isotonic solution. If we take that same cell and place it into a solution with an effective osmolarity of 270 milliosmoles, now we have a difference in osmotic pressure that each of these solutions inside the cell and outside the cell are creating. As a result of a difference in osmotic pressure, water will move. In this case, as in all cases, water will move toward the higher osmotic pressure, so water will move into the cell, causing the cell to swell. This is an example of a hypotonic solution. Finally, if we place our cell in a solution that has an effective osmolarity that's greater than 285, here I say 300 milliosmoles. So in this case, the osmotic pressure of the solution outside of the cell is greater than inside. Water will move toward the higher osmotic pressure. So placing a cell in this type of solution will result in water leaving the cell and the cell shrinking. This type of solution is referred to as a hypertonic solution. As a physician, understanding tonicity is extremely important. We have homeostatic processes that we will learn about as we go through the semester, which function to keep the effective osmolarity of our extracellular fluid around 285. By doing so, this limits any significant net movement of water either in or out of the cell, thereby maintaining normal cell size. Particular condition that a patient is experiencing, or if a patient receives treatment from a physician that significantly changes the effective plasma osmolarity, that will also be transmitted to the extracellular environment of our cells. As a result, it can produce substantial shifts in water either into or out of the cells. This is particularly important in organs such as the brain, where rapid changes in cell volume can have serious neurologic consequences. In our next lecture, we will work through how different types of fluid, either gained or lost, can impact cell volume.